after that sequence, the movie really gets popping.
Terrible.
That was an accident, but I'm going to pretend it wasn't.
Hello and welcome to A Century in Cinema. My name is Arthur.
And my name is Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we watch and discuss a classic film from every year. This week we're in 1964, taking a look at Mary Poppins from Disney Studios and directed by Robert Stevenson. For any new listeners, you can find where our movies are streaming or available to rent online down in the link in our show notes. Not a big surprise, but I watched this one on Disney+. Andrew, I'm going to guess you own it?
Oh, yeah.
It's worth owning.
Definitely. And the Blu-ray is so crisp and gorgeous. I love it. For our longtime listeners, don't forget to give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It just helps out with the algorithm of the whole app. It sort of makes us more noticeable and helps other people who are listening to similar podcasts see ours, and it makes us more visible and gets us more listeners, which is really what we're doing this for, is to reach as many people as possible. So it helps us out. It takes less than a minute. Do it on your spare time. And thank you so much.
I mean, and to any new listeners who enjoy the show.
That's true, I guess. Give us the rating you think we deserve as long as it is 5 stars.
All right, let's give ourselves a little context for the year, 1964.
Ooh.
Well, in the United States, as Bob Dylan wrote, Andrew, the times they are a-changin'. It's coming out this year.
Great song.
I love that song. As always, there's good and bad going on. For the good, we have the Civil Rights Act signed into law. For the bad, we have the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and that escalates the war in Vietnam. The American military becomes much more involved. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela is sentenced to life in prison. I can't believe that happened. So 1964 seems so long ago.
It feels like forever ago. It's crazy that culmination happened so recently for us.
Mm-hmm. There's a fun little connection with 2021 when we're recording this podcast, but the Summer Olympics are held in Tokyo this year.
Tokyo Olympiad. I've never seen that. Have you?
No, not a big sports guy.
I've just heard it's really great, but I've never watched it. Well, that's like considered a really great film. But I've never been one for the Olympics.
China tests their first nuclear bomb this year, and Sony releases their first VCR player.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think it's commercially viable yet or anything like that. Not even close, but you know.
Yeah, because I thought the VHS boom really started in the late 70s, early 80s. That's actually kind of surprising to hear.
And, you know, we're in the 60s when a ton of great films are coming out. Just year after year, it feels like...
Yes.
Even though the studio system is sort of collapsing, we still have classic after classic. Andrew, do you want to go over some of those?
Yes, I actually want to take a stab, because I don't have this confirmed, but I'm going to guess there are 3 films here that you and I both love and have seen. The first guess I have is Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb.
Beautiful, beautiful follow-up to the Cuban Missile Crisis that we talked about in 1962.
The second is Qui-Gon.
What?
Oh, have you never seen Qui-Gon?
No.
Oh, strike against me. And then the third is Ghidorah, the 3-headed monster.
You are so close. This is the only year from Toho that they released 2 Godzilla films, and it's Mothra versus Godzilla. That is the one I love.
Well, I'm still going to count. I mean...
You got that one.
Yeah, and it's the one where Godzilla becomes a good guy.
It's true. It's a big turning point for Godzilla.
That you haven't seen Qui-Gon isn't shocking to me, but you should add it to your watch list. I know this podcast is like 50% us discussing movies and 50% me giving you a ridiculous watch list that you'll never get to.
I occasionally get to.
I have a huge watch list of stuff that I never get to as well. That was not meant to be critical. I think every movie lover does.
Yes.
And Onibaba is another film that I would recommend from this year. Qui-Gon and Onibaba are both really phenomenal horror films coming out of Japan. Qui-Gon tells these 4 different myths that were all just passed down through time and culture in Japan, and most of them don't even have a written version that existed, and it adapts those 4 stories in this gorgeous poetic visual way, and it's really terrifying at points, but the whole thing is so beautiful. And Onibaba is a horror film that is also critical of samurai culture. And it's about these 2 women who live in this forest of reeds where they're able to hide from these rogue samurai who are going around and molesting and killing women. And they drug them, take their samurai gear to sell, and then kill them. And the 3rd act gets insane. It's a really great horror film. I love it so much. Other very notable films from this year, Umbrellas of Cherbourg, kind of the beginning of Jacques Demy finally breaking through internationally, and still just one of the most gorgeous musicals. I actually just revisited that film a couple months ago. It's such a beautiful movie. Goldfinger, that's a top 5 Bond for me. I love Goldfinger, and I love the theme song. Woman in the Dunes, Teshigahara film. Another really great Japanese horror film. The film that we watched together, Soikuba, the next film from Mikhail Kalatazov, comes out in 1964. Antonioni's beautiful criticism of industrialization and capitalism, Red Desert, is released this year. Beautiful film. A Hard Day's Night, the first Beatles film, comes out this year. Beatlemania is kicking into full gear. The Hitchcock thriller Marnie, the not technically a horror film, but I would describe it as a horror film. The Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer stop-motion animation film comes out this year. Not only is Rudolph creepy and all of the good guys are creepy, but then the characters that are supposed to be scary, specifically the Abominable Snowman, that thing haunted my dreams for years. Carl Theodor Dreyer makes a late career masterpiece with Gertrude, which we discussed during our vampire episode. And is there anything else I wanted to say? Oh, Pale Flower comes out this year. Another more obscure recommendation. Another great Japanese film. Dang, this is my year. You had
54, 10 years ago.
Oh, 54, 10 years later. This is when I want to be in the theaters in Japan. These are some banger movies. I love these movies.
I mean, this looks like a great year to go to the theaters all around. You also have Sergio Leone releasing A Fistful of Dollars with Clint Eastwood, and I really like that whole series.
Yes, absolutely.
Is this one of Clint Eastwood's first films?
I think he started his career with Leone. Am I wrong about that?
He did some other stuff.
But it doesn't look like he was a leading man. No, he definitely was never. He was bit parts in some small Hollywood stuff, but his first leading man performance was A Fistful of Dollars. So.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. But this year, we are discussing the seminal Disney classic, Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins.
Okay. The film takes place in 1910 Edwardian England. We are introduced by Bert, who is a homeless one-man band performing chimney sweep wizard. He introduces us to the Banks family, George Banks, the domineering patriarch, his wife Winifred, a burgeoning feminist who is subdued and incapacitated by her husband, and their 2 children, Jane and Michael, who are good-tempered and adorable, but have a tendency towards mischief. After Jane and Michael cause yet another nanny to quit, George feels he has no choice but to hire a nanny under the conditions that she is militant, unforgiving, and essentially a carbon copy of himself. Jane and Michael also write a list of what they would like in a nanny, but George quickly rips this up and throws it into a fireplace. On the day of the nanny interviews, Mary Poppins arrives with the letter that was ripped up, and she is immediately able to convince George that she is the only one capable of this position. Mary Poppins inflicts both a sense of discipline and wonder in the children. She has magical powers and is able to help people acknowledge their own flaws as well as help people find joy in life. She uses these powers to take Jane and Michael on many adventures, including a sequence where they're transported into a chalk drawing with Bert and a meeting with a man who laughs so hard he is stuck to a ceiling. As a result of his children describing these seemingly impossible events, George decides to fire Mary Poppins, but she turns his words on him and convinces him to take the children with him to the bank. At the bank, the children are terrified by the capitalistic and bureaucratic nature of the institution and run away. Bert finds the children and takes them home. Mary Poppins shows up as he starts to clean their chimney, and the children are whisked away to a magical rooftop run by other chimney sweep wizards. George comes home to chaos and mayhem, and in the middle of trying to figure out what is going on, gets a call from the bank that he has lost his job because of his children's behavior. While being fired, the magic that Mary Poppins has inspired in others finally comes through to George, and he leaves in good spirits. This causes his boss to laugh so hard that he dies. In the end, George is able to finally understand and connect with his children and his wife, and gets his job back. Mary Poppins sees that her job is done and leaves without saying goodbye, off to help the next family in need.
Did the boss die?
Yes. So we sort of discussed this a little bit with Dumbo. Is this legitimately your very first time watching this film?
Yes, as far as I know. I might have seen it when I was 2 years old, and I just don't have any recollection, but so much of this film was completely new to me. Unlike with Dumbo, which I had seen as a small child, and I just wasn't really able to recall it. This was a totally new experience for me.
I'm a little envious of that.
To watch Mary Poppins as a cynical adult for the very first time.
I mean, did it make you feel like a cynical adult?
No, it made me feel delightful and full of joy and wonder. I loved this movie.
Oh, that's so nice to hear.
Love Mary Poppins. Mm-hmm. What a fun character. I loved all the characters. I loved this entire movie. I love the songs. I love the sets. I love the colors, all the visual effects and the magic. It's really, really fun.
Oh, that's so good to hear. Yes, I love this movie as well. This was always one of my favorites as a kid. It was one of the few films that I was really allowed to watch, and I tore up this VHS. I would watch this movie all the time. This was like my movie as a kid. So I have a very, very sentimental relationship with this film. It's sort of difficult for me to look at it critically, although I definitely did try that with this viewing. But in the end, I mean, this movie just always wins me over. There are parts of this movie that no matter what will always bring me to tears. There are parts of this movie that no matter what always make me laugh. I don't know. There's a certain magic in this movie and that's so cheesy to say, especially when regarding a Disney property, because I know that's sort of their whole bread and butter, and I kind of hate their whole, oh, we're actually magical, when really they're just actually a horrible birth of capitalism that is like ruining the movie industry. But in this film's case, I can't help it. I don't know. There is a magical, mystical quality to this film that I appreciate and love.
Well put. Well, that's a great summary. We usually go with Bosley Crowther's opinion from the New York Times. I don't know. His review was so glowing, so full of love and joy that just seemed like it was repeating exactly what I felt and what I imagined a ton of people feel. I thought this review was kind of interesting, Andrew, because it has a bit of cynicism to it. Is that what you found interesting?
Oh, no, I was thinking of the name from Variety, Whitney Williams. This is not that review. Oh, I guess this is just written by Time itself as a concept. Time itself showed up to review Mary Poppins. That's how magical this film is. This is weird that there's no credit at all.
Yeah, I don't know whose opinion this is.
I did enjoy that this seemed to be the review. I read 4 different reviews for this, and then this was the only one that mentioned Dick Van Dyke's accent.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I thought that was funny because for me, and this is probably because I was watching it as a kid, so I just didn't even think about it critically. But for me, that whole Dick Van Dyke has one of the worst accents ever put into a film thing that he himself, by the way, thinks is hilarious and acknowledges as well. For me, that's kind of a more recent reappraisal of the film. So to see this review from the year be like, this accent is horrible, though, right? Like they sort of say they love the movie. It has a lot of magic and they enjoy it so much. But this accent is really bad, which I think is pretty funny.
Yeah, this is still a glowing review, but amongst the ones that I kind of browsed, it poked a little bit more at the movie than the others. Specifically, yeah, they say, quote, Dick Van Dyke is uneasy with his accent, but nonetheless nimble as Bert, the Cockney chimney sweep, end quote.
And it's so difficult to even criticize his performance because, of course, you know the accent is bad as soon as the movie starts. But then he starts, in that same sequence, he starts actually performing the one-man band thing. I don't know, you're like, well, okay, I can see why he got the role. He's magnetic and entertaining and clearly incredibly talented. I think that accents are difficult in general. As an actor, I can say that I find accents extremely difficult.
There's so many nuances, and then on top of it, you're acting in a film and you're playing a character, and sometimes accent just isn't the element at the forefront of your brain. I don't know.
This was also the only review I saw that calls out Ed Wynn, Uncle Albert, the man who's laughing so hard, as one of the strongest, if not the strongest performers in the movie. And I really like that because that is the sequence. I mean, and I think that it's just human psychology of you hear someone else laughing, and the more you hear someone else laughing, the more inclined you are to laugh yourself. And I think it's just that part of that scene. But man, every time I watch that scene, sometimes it takes a little bit longer than other times I watch it, but I'm always giggling by the end. That sequence where Dick Van Dyke in the middle of the song starts describing other people's types of laughs and starts emulating all the different styles of laughter, that kills me every time. I think that's like the funniest thing I've ever seen in a movie. Yeah, I'm just happy that Edwin gets a little call out there because I think that scene is so great and he really anchors it.
I think I relate to Mary Poppins in that scene. I think everyone should just calm down.
You didn't laugh at all?
I don't like puns.
But even just him laughing is funny.
No, puns are bad. This review ends with, quote, though overlong and sometimes overcute, Mary Poppins is the drollest Disney film in decades, a feat of
prestidigitation.
A feat of prestidigitation. With many more lifts than lapses, end quote. I kind of got that. Yeah, so they still love this film, even if they're going to poke at it, which I can understand. It is sometimes over cute. But who cares? I loved it.
I know this film got a standing ovation at its premiere, and people coming out were saying that it was just incredible. I know that like it was pretty much immediately a surefire hit as soon as it was released. So I'm imagining this Time reviewer was either A, completely aware of that reception going in, or B, was actually attending that premiere themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I can imagine in a whirlwind like that, and probably every other review coming out being completely overwhelmingly positive, not just wanting to sort of bring up those issues, but feeling that there is a need for it since nobody else is.
Being the one contrarian.
Well, I don't have as much information, I think, on the P.L. Travers Walt Disney stuff as you do. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about that?
It's interesting because as a companion piece to Mary Poppins, I did watch Saving Mr. Banks, which is the 2013 film that is a dramatization of the behind-the-scenes drama going on with the adaptation of Mary Poppins. Because I didn't know this, that Mary Poppins is based on classic children's books, really popular books from the 1930s by P.L. Travers. And I also didn't know how much she really despised the idea of having her characters adapted into film. But for financial reasons, she sold the rights to the Walt Disney Company. The film Saving Mr. Banks is just a strange experience because it is...
And it's made by Disney.
Worth stating up front, yes, it is made by Disney Studios. And you feel it. You definitely feel it when you're watching the film, that it is a retelling of the behind-the-scenes story in order to sort of sanitize what happened. Now, I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. I didn't do a ton of research on it. I'm sure you could read biographies and interviews from P.L. Travers. Reports state that she was very unhappy with the final product. She didn't like that there was music. She didn't like that there was animation. She didn't like that her characters were now kind of assimilated into this tapestry of products that the Disney company uses to sell the Disney brand. So I can absolutely see where she's coming from with that, even though the music, the animations, some of my favorite parts of the film, I can see where, as an author of the original work, she's feeling overshadowed and like something was taken from her. There are no Mary Poppins sequels, even though Disney Studios would have loved to make them. I know that was it Bedknobs and Broomsticks?
Yes, same director and everything, yes.
Is sort of an answer to the fact that Walt Disney can't make any more Mary Poppins films. Didn't have the rights to do any more.
But the one thing I do know about Saving Mr. Banks, and actually one of the reasons I never saw it, that, as you said, in the end, P.L. Travers was not happy with the film and actually walked out of the screening. But in the film Saving Mr. Banks, it's presented as like a cathartic moment, and she really finds love in the film, right?
Yes.
That's so weird.
It's very strange.
And it's weird because it's such public knowledge about her ultimate dissatisfaction with the project. I don't know. It's weird because I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years or if anyone's even ever going to care about this. But it's weird to think that Disney could potentially rewrite history with that movie just because more people have seen that than done their own personal research.
Yes.
I don't know. That's weird to think about.
Andrew, how do you feel about the fact that you love this film? It means a lot to you, but the original author of the characters really hates it.
Well, funny you should ask that. I actually have always been a fan of these books as well. I still have my copy of the first book, but I always loved both. And that is saying something because when I was young, the thing that made my parents know that I was going to be involved in film and specifically criticism was like my favorite book was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And then we went and saw Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory at some free Friday Night Flicks thing. And I hated it because of all of the changes. I was like, this is a horrible movie. I'm like 6 years old. I think I'm like 5 or 6 years old. And I'm just sitting there complaining about the movie because I liked the book. And so this movie, which I also watched after reading the book, I found to be completely magical and loved. And again, it's all wrapped up in nostalgia for me. I respect her as an author and an artist, and I respect her not liking this project, but the project still exists whether she likes it or not. And personally, I think that it is a very good reflection of the character. I think it's strange that she thinks they ripped away all of the sternness, sarcasm, and
narcissism.
Yes, that she thinks they ripped away those characteristics from her, because for me, I think the Julie Andrews character has all of those qualities, and they are very striking and kind of what sets her apart from other sort of, mystical nanny figures. The way she's just completely obsessed with her appearance, whenever she looks into a mirror, the tape measure calling her perfect, I think all those elements are in there, and I don't think they are lessened in a Disney-fied way. I think they are just lessened in a movie adaptation way.
That's absolutely the thing. I think sometimes authors, especially of literature, are not the best judges of cinematic adaptations of their work, just because the art form is so very, very different, honestly. Yeah, the two mediums have different strengths and weaknesses, and you have to play to each of them, in my opinion.
I agree. I also just think she never wanted this to be a movie in general. I don't think there was any way to make her happy with this sort of thing. And I do think the capitalistic nature of Disney is a fair thing to be worried about and to be concerned about for your personal creation. So
rather than the minutia of what's going on in the actual film.
She didn't end up giving them full marketing and licensing rights as far as making toys, right? There weren't toys made.
I don't know.
If I remember correctly, that's why there's like not Mary Poppins dolls and stuff like that.
Okay.
I think that sort of ended up helping this film in the long run.
It's not ruined by anything else in a franchise or anything like that. Oh, wait. There is a sequel.
Well, the sequel, because it became public domain, is that what happened? If I remember correctly?
I would imagine her estate, now that P.L. Travers has passed away, is less strict about how to use the rights to the film.
That's why they were able to make Saving Mr. Banks as well.
It's so interesting, because I do want to say that I do respect that in Saving Mr. Banks, she gets a fair say through most of the film.
Mm-hmm.
They do allow her criticisms of everything Disney to have their time in the film, although the ending still feels very strange.
I will say that I actually really loved that sequel as well. I thought that was a phenomenal movie musical, and I said that when I came out of it in theaters. I flew down to Alabama to visit my parents for a week, and that was one of the things we did, was go and see that together. And I was totally ready to just be completely cynical of it and hate it. And then like the third song, which is sung by Ben Wishaw's character. I mean, we're still in the opening 15 minutes of the movie, and it just struck me in the heart, and I started just sobbing in the theater. And then I look around, and everyone in the theater is just crying at this song, and Mary Poppins hasn't even come on screen yet. And I'm thinking, oh no, this is about to be like so good.
They got it.
I will say they made Mary Poppins an alto because Emily Blunt is an alto. That's my only criticism of the entire film.
What is Julie Andrews?
A soprano. A gorgeous soprano voice. And in general, she's a better singer than Emily Blunt is, but I'm not going to compare the two, even though the comparison is free to make, just because it's two different actors approaching the role, and I think they both do a really phenomenal job with it. But Julie Andrews is the iconic originator.
I'll mention very quickly that Walt Disney's children loved the books, so he had a personal attachment to the property and was just adamant about getting it made. And that's why I think he put up with the tumultuous relationship with P.L. Travers, and eventually they worked something out.
I always think that's interesting when the children of the people who make the films influence the decisions being made.
I feel like Disney Studios is always going through highs and lows where they seem to be struggling, and then they recapture whatever that magic is. And what is your impression of Disney Studios in 1960s?
I know that this was a really big and important project for them, similar to Dumbo, something that sort of ended up saving them from financial ruin. I don't know all of the details around that. Give me just a second, actually. I want to look something up.
Sure. Because I think it's funny, we've been sort of checking in on Disney throughout this project, where we started with Steamboat Willie back in the 20s, and then Dumbo in the 40s, and now checking in again in the 60s with Mary Poppins. It does seem like they fall off the map every now and then.
Yeah, and as far as their animation department goes, this actually is kind of the middle of another falling off the map. The last time we talked about them being saved was mentioned briefly in an episode where I talked about Cinderella being considered the beginning of the golden age of Disney animation. Mm-hmm. But even that golden age is more of a retrospect thing, just because the quality of the films as far as their success, because this is right after 101 Dalmatians and Sword in the Stone, which were the first two in that weird era of the Disney films looking like hand-drawn sketches with the sketchy lines around all the characters. You know what I'm talking about.
And they're rotoscoping from past projects too, aren't they?
Right.
It's cheap.
So yeah, I know that those two films did not do well. 101 Dalmatians is so funny to think about how that film wasn't a huge success at the time, because now it's considered one of their most iconic films. And then they're right in the middle of making The Jungle Book when Mary Poppins comes out. I know The Jungle Book also underperformed. They're heading down a dangerous slope right up until Little Mermaid in 1989 right now, as far as their animation studio goes. So I do know this film, they were really hoping for something very successful. I know Walt Disney was sort of relying on this project to save the company a little bit, but that's pretty much the extent of what I know.
You don't get any of that in Saving Mr. Banks, by the way.
Oh. I really just want to take a moment. I mean, literally, my brain doesn't understand how to compute what listening to this score for the first time in your late 20s is like.
It was like West Side Story. I'd heard a ton of these before.
Okay.
I knew all of these songs, almost all of them.
Every time I watch it, I feel like there's one or two that catches me off guard. I always forget about George's little song when he's describing what he wants in the nanny. That's sort of just a reprise of his regular song, but I always forget there's a little number there. I always forget how short supercalifragilisticexpialidocious is.
I was trying so hard to remember that word. I'll get it someday.
Oh, I can still spell it.
What's your favorite song in this? Do you have one?
Oh, Feed the Birds. Banger.
Nice.
That song rocks. I remember watching it as a kid for the first time, and I just felt it sort of creep right into my little heart, and I loved it so much. I like that one. I love the lullaby Stay Awake, where the lyrics are her talking about how, oh, you're so energetic, there's no reason to go to bed. But the melody itself is this really soothing lullaby. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really interesting song. And Let's Go Fly a Kite at the end, I think, is just a perfect way to end the whole film. Yeah, it lifts my spirits every time I hear it. I can't lie.
I think that's true. I loved Let's Go Fly a Kite. I think that was my favorite song in the film. And maybe that's just because it ended the film and it left me with such a positive, joyful feeling that it really stuck with me. But there's great songs throughout this film.
Yeah, I find myself singing Let's Go Fly a Kite at random points in my day, like all the time, throughout my entire life.
Right. Listen, I will always love a character arc where a cynical bastard becomes a life-loving, singing, kite-flying. I don't have a noun, just adjectives.
But still a banker at the end. What do you think the film's even trying to say about that? This viewing in particular, I thought, wait, he just gets his job back at the bank, but it feels like his cynical view of the world was specifically stemming from that job.
But his boss is dead, so it's better now.
Oh, yeah, and that's the other song I always forget, is the Bankers song, where they're all just crowding around, and then Dick Van Dyke comes out in the old man makeup, and he can't get down the step. That melody and everything, I don't know, for some reason it always completely eludes me. And every time I watch it, I try harder and harder to understand what exactly they're saying in those lyrics. Because honestly, it's a little hard to decipher. I mean, it's a testament to the film's visual language, because you don't need to hear those lyrics at all to understand they are just this menacing mob of bankers.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
I think they made up words, because there are some words they say that I think that's a real word. And then some they sing, because I had subtitles on for it this time too. And I was watching it and I was like, no, that is not a real word. And I don't know. I think that's funny that they're like made up whimsical terms, even in the stone-faced banker number that's supposed to just be threatening.
We should talk about Julie Andrews.
Oh. Are you familiar at all with Camelot?
No.
So Camelot is a Lerner and Loewe musical joint from 1960. It's a really fun show. I've seen it before many times. It's a pretty famous musical. And Julie Andrews originated the role of Guinevere. And it's a very complex role, because it starts off as her being introduced, and she is sort of like a Disney princess almost, rejecting the betrothal she has to have and trying to break free and live her own princessy life. But then she meets Arthur and they actually do legitimately fall in love. And you think, oh, this is so nice. And in the second act, it all turns and she cheats on Arthur with Lancelot, and it turns into this very steamy romance between them. And then it ends with Arthur having no choice but to sentence her to death, and Lancelot comes in and rescues her. It's a really great show. I mean, it's the story of King Arthur. It's once and future king, you know, that sort of thing. And the original Broadway soundtrack recording with her is so good. Great music. Recommend listening to it sometime. But I know that the Sherman brothers, who wrote the score and music for Mary Poppins, saw a production of Camelot, and when they saw her perform, were so blown away that they said that has to be Mary Poppins. And at this point, I know they were looking at Bette Davis as well as Angela Lansbury. Imagining Bette Davis playing this role is like about the funniest thing I could possibly imagine. She would just actually murder the children. That is how Bette Davis would play Mary Poppins.
So Julie Andrews got her start in musicals?
Yes, she was a stage performer long before she was in film.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and this was her first movie. She originated the role of Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, the musical.
And that's what the critics are always referencing in the reviews that we looked at.
It was just a huge deal at the time, because it seemed really obvious to many people that Julie Andrews was going to be cast as Eliza Doolittle. And when they denied it and said that she couldn't, it honestly caused a big upset within the theater community, because there was such a desire to see her play that role in the film. And then, of course, she gets this role. Audrey Hepburn gets Eliza Doolittle. Audrey Hepburn records her own singing for Eliza Doolittle, and then the studio decides they don't want that anymore and has someone else come in and sing the role for her, which I always think is just the shadiest thing.
So weird.
Yeah. And then, of course, infamously, Julie Andrews won the Golden Globe over Audrey Hepburn. And then Audrey Hepburn wasn't even nominated for an Oscar, while Julie Andrews won one. But what's really interesting is that there was a lot of gossip around this, and it was a big talking point at the time. But as far as the two actresses are concerned, they always got along and always respected each other. And I don't know. I always thought that was really nice that there was this huge media firestorm that was pretty much specifically designed to sort of try and start up a sort of rivalry and a catfight between those two women. And they were unable to succeed because the two actors involved rose above it.
They're just too good of people. I've always loved Audrey Hepburn. That's not any sort of hot take, but I didn't know Julie Andrews before this film. And I've got to say, I love her. She's great.
Oh, yeah.
I want to see more with her. And I mean, lucky us. Sound of Music next week.
But yeah, so she got her start in this film. And can you imagine? I'm trying to think of other introducing roles that are this iconic and assured. I think of Melanie Laurent in Inglourious Bastards. That's the first one that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of other actors who it's like introducing and then they are the strongest performer in the film and completely steal the show. I'm sure it's happened other times, but this is an achievement. I mean, acting for stage and acting for screen are so completely different from each other, and she transitions flawlessly. And not just doing a movie musical with these huge effects where all of this is done in post, all of these matte paintings, all of these smoke effects and everything. You know, she's interacting with invisible things and she's never even been on a film set before. And none of that shows at all. I honestly think it's her performance that sort of sells the effects. The effects are phenomenal, but she has such an assuredness and confidence about her that when she believes and sees the things on the screen, we believe in seeing them too. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially with the animated sequences. I've got to believe that's one of the first times the live action and animated sequences have been blended together so well.
Yes. Disney had attempted it before and had done little sequences here and there, but never anything on that level. And actually, that was the first stuff that they filmed, was all the animation sequences.
Yeah, get that stuff out of the way. That's hard.
Yeah, but again, can you imagine? I mean, Julie Andrews' story is that she got on set, was put in costume, and then the first thing she had to do was interact with Dick Van Dyke, and they both were pretending that they were in an animated fairy tale world and talking to these little animals and being told where to point. And yeah, it wasn't until later that she was able to actually do the practical effects stuff. So it sort of threw her right into the fire, but it doesn't show at all. Those animated sequences are incredible.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the film's use of Technicolor. I love the Technicolor process. Just because of this project, I have a newfound respect for it. But the sets designed by Tony Walden, you want to talk a little bit about that?
I just think it's so fascinating that Tony Walden was Julie Andrews' husband. And when Walt Disney was approached by the Sherman Brothers that Julie Andrews needed to perform the role, and then he saw her perform on Ed Sullivan, he approached her and was talking to her, and then saw her husband and said, "What do you do?" And the husband said, "Oh, I design sets." And he says, "You should come work on our film." And then he designs these immaculate sets for this film. The sets in this movie are unbelievable. The house alone is just an achievement, and it's multi-leveled and has all of these artifacts and this huge piano, and it just looks like an actual house. It looks like a house that's lived in and then kept clean, which I think is a really, really difficult thing to pull off visually. To pull off a well-kept house and not make it look like it's just a set that's like primed and polished before shooting every day, I think takes a level of skill that I'm not even completely sure on. Do you know what I mean?
Production design is a tricky, tricky job, and there's a lot that goes into it that people will never notice because it's all in the background. But you feel it. And you definitely feel like the sets and the look of this film is like something out of a children's book. I loved the exterior, the street. Right, which is another huge, big set.
Super impressive. And I love those old men on the boat. I love it when they're in the lifeboat and they're hanging down to clean the window with a mop. As if
Yeah.
they're like using the dirty mop on the ship deck, but instead they're using it on an actual window.
Mm-hmm.
This is a dumb joke that I think is super funny.
Should we talk about our final thoughts?
Are we there?
A little quick episode, but I'm going to use most of this.
Okay. Just not that section on M. Night Shyamalan.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I love this film. It's a childhood favorite of mine. This was a good weekend for me to revisit it as well, and I was touched by it. And I'm happy that we're getting to do an episode on it. It's weird because this one isn't necessarily a recommendation kind of episode. Not because I'm not recommending the film, but because I'm assuming most people have seen it. But hopefully, like our Dumbo episode, it'll just get a bunch of people to listen.
And I hope people who have watched this film as kids and love it get an insight and appreciation for some of the behind the scenes stuff going on. Yeah, I didn't know this was based on a book. I didn't know anything about the author or her feelings on the film. And I'm really fascinated the creative process that goes into adapting something like this. And I do think that it's important to recognize the author's feelings. Well, I'm really glad that you were a fan of the books too, and that you have some sort of judgment on both of them, because I was really curious if this was a total departure from P.L. Travers' original work. According to you, it's not. It still has the same sort of magic. You still get something out of both versions of the Mary Poppins story. And that's honestly kind of delightful to hear, because just knowing how she felt about the film made me feel a little bad how much I loved it.
I definitely can understand that. It is funny to talk about this because it does remind me of the Dumbo episode, how we discussed the special features on the Blu-ray for Dumbo were disingenuous towards the actual strife of the animators and the reasoning behind their strike. And to come to this film, which as itself, as a self-contained film, I think is one of Disney's strongest projects. And even that film, like all the way up to, when did that film come out? 2017, 2016, right?
Oh, Saving Mr. Banks, 2013.
Mm-hmm. 2013?
Yeah.
What? Oh my God.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. But to know that even as late as 2013, they're still doing that sort of thing where they say, well, I mean, she was the cynical adult who couldn't allow Disney magic into her heart. But once she did, everyone became much happier. Buy a Mickey doll. It's so weird and gross. I hate it. But the film itself is still great. And it's, I think a lot of people like to look at people who were super critical of Disney as cynical, like they're not allowing a certain amount of innocence or childishness to be able to come in. But really, it just comes from acknowledging the actual facts. Like, they can make great films. They've proven that before, and I'm sure they will make another one again. I would love to see that, actually, because, Lord, it's been a while. But the background of the company itself and the way they approach media and the way they're able to manipulate stuff and be completely successful with it on almost every regard as far as the majority of the public goes is so frightening. So, yeah, that's just another example of that, even in this film, which I love dearly and think is a great movie. And if I were to ever have kids, would definitely show, too.
I mean, we kind of go over that in our Dumbo episode, right? Just how do you reconcile acknowledging the history and the behind the scenes stories behind films that you really love and hold a place in your heart, just like they're important to you and they're important to who you are and how you grew up. And that's a strange balancing act, honestly. It makes me feel icky sometimes.
Yes.
So now I have a new film to feel icky about.
But that is the actual magic of Mary Poppins, is that I've known all of that information for a long time, and it does not matter how cynical I go into this movie. Every time by the end, it legitimately makes me feel better. It makes me a happier human.
Well, we planted it earlier, but next week we're watching Sound of Music.
Yes, 1965.
More Julie Andrews.
Yes, continuing our dive into the Julie Andrews becomes a nanny to adorable children's verse. I'm excited for you to see it. I'm excited to talk about it.
We're far enough away now from World War II in our project that we're having some reappraisals and retrospectives on it, which is kind of fun.
Yep.
As always, check the show notes to see where you can rent or stream Sound of Music.
What's the Sound of Music if you're going for accuracy?
Oh, the Sound of Music. Thank you to our listeners. If you liked the episode, we appreciate the reviews and responses. Thank you very much.
And thank you to Nathan Royal for our show's music.
Thank you, Nathan. Let's jam out of here. I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.